All right. I just wanted to introduce our speaker for tonight, Tom Warren. Tom Warren is a former photojournalist who now lives in Dobbs Ferry, and is an avid bird photographer who has had his photos featured in Audubon's Top 100 5 times. Tom will not only share some of his most recent photography, but we'll talk about how the latest photo technology has both simplified but even in a way complicated the art of capturing photos of birds in their Westchester County habitats. He will also provide tips to help make your bird photography a little less daunting than it may seem. And we'll be discussing the latest technology involving mirrorless cameras and artificial intelligence. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Tom Warren. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Aaron. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all tonight. And it's just really great to be able to share my love for birds and photography with such like-minded people. So thank you for joining us. Besides being just a lot of fun, bird photography, oh, let's see. Oh, there it is. Sorry about that. Bird photography can allow us to get a closer look at the amazing colors seen in a northern flicker. As a great teaching tool, our photography makes it possible to see exactly what type of insect a palm warbler might be snagging out of thin air during its spring migration. Our photos can help us revisit the experience of seeing thousands of red-winged blackbirds as they gather on farmland, and that should start happening again just next month. Bird photography also allows us to study bird behavior in greater detail. Behavior like this display of what appears to be territorial defense between two eastern bluebirds. It can help us capture the grace of the great blue heron seen during its slow motion takeoff from a platform of lily pads. By watching this bird closely, we're reminded that birds are our only living link to dinosaurs. I photographed this veery, a bird unlike most in that it will gladly sit still for a while you take its picture. But what was remarkable to me is that when I looked at the photo, I could see that the veery is balanced perfectly on a broken branch that is balanced perfectly against a tree. That got me wondering how light these birds must be to balance on a little branch like that. It turns out the veery's weight is about 1 ounce. That's the same weight as one single AA battery. Now, for me, photography has really been hugely helpful in identifying birds well after the fact that I've seen them. I'll go home and get the photos on my computer. And this is what happened when I had an opportunity to photograph some interesting gulls on a very calm morning on the Hudson River near Tarrytown, the Rockefeller Park Rockwood Hall section. It wasn't until I got home and enlarged this gull that I was able to see the black wings and sent it to a good friend of mine who knows birds very well. And he and others were able to determine this was a little gull. And that find was only because I was able to capture this photo from a great distance and then get it home and enlarge it on my computer. So how do we go about attempting to capture the incredible beauty of birds? That is, to do them justice. Well, we start by respecting the birds and to try to put their well-being first. A good summary of best ethical practices in bird photography can be found on the National Audubon Society website. It is well worth reading. Now, last summer, you might have seen this, Audubon magazine ran a feature on artificial intelligence, or AI, as it pertains to bird photography. The photo that you see on the left was the grand prize winner last year in the Audubon's annual contest. Finally, rock pigeons have got their due. They're really beautiful birds, and they finally are given the attention they deserve. Now, what was interesting about the photo on the right was the photographer added some information to a website called Doll-E, and AI generated this photo very similar to his. That photo on the right is completely fabricated with a computer algorithm, that is. Here's another example of some software that's now popular called Midjourney. The photo on the right, excuse me, on the left is the original photo of a bald eagle photographed by Tim Flack, who then entered simply bald eagle and his name in the Midjourney algorithm, and that's the produced photo you see on the right. So this is a situation where you can see that there's a lot of controversy regarding copyright infringement. It's important that AI generated photos have to be labeled as such. They also allow for a cheap and easy way for some people to spread false information, as you've probably heard. And that also is in the area of wildlife photography. I wanted to share with you a photograph I took. I used to go to the Bronx Zoo quite often. This is actually a real photo. Uh, as amazing as it is, this Western lowland gorilla seemed to be having a little bit of a conversation with this little mallard duckling that made its way into the gorilla exhibit. It was fascinating to watch. I felt so lucky to be there. And the photo did win a nature photo contest that had a zoos and aquarium category. So I thought I would go ahead and give this Dali a try and see what happens. So I entered into this Dali, a photorealistic painting of a Western lowland gorilla sitting on a log next to a mallard duckling. It gives you 4 options to choose from. The AI system is trained on billions of text and image pairs that allows users to create images by using text prompts. Its first version for this particular software was rolled out way back in 2022, and it's already considered to be outdated. The photo that I felt was closest to mine was the one on the far right, which is this piece of art right here. If you want to call it art, I think that's another controversy. And that's my original photo. So you can see it's pretty obvious they used my photo in order to train this AI software to produce the artwork that I asked for. I asked this same software, a birder with a pair of binoculars in a New York City suburb viewing a beautiful pink flamingo. And these are the 4 options it came up with. I don't I don't know about you, but those flamingos are looking pretty plastic. And this just goes to show that in some instances, it still has a ways to go, but you know it's getting there. Now, I want to talk about what it takes to come up with images that we're very pleased with, that we want to be able to capture quality images of birds. So there's the bridge cameras. These are so-called super zoom cameras. They don't produce the very highest quality images, like some of the cameras we'll be talking about in a bit. But for many birders who want a lightweight, easy to use camera, mostly for documentation or ID purposes, this is a good way to go. But these cameras are not all that durable, and they're not weather sealed. They also do not perform very well in low light, and their autofocus is slow. So they're better for birds that are standing still. Instead, we want to be able to freely shoot in inclement weather, such as when we are photographing puddle birds at Pelham Bay Park. Today's better cameras are weather sealed for added durability. They also have tremendous autofocusing capabilities. They do well in low light and can capture several images in just 1 second. The best image quality does require a bit of an investment in good gear. I put a chart together of the award-winning photos, that is the cameras used for the award-winning photos in the last competition. As you can see, mirrorless has overtaken DSLRs now. I'm going to talk about the difference between the two in just a bit. But I think it's worth mentioning that there's still a lot of photographers that use DSLRs out there. And if you're thinking about getting into high quality bird photography, you can actually get a good deal on a DSLR for people that are switching into mirrorless, that is in the used market. Now, a popular DSLR was the D500. I say was because Nikon is no longer making them new, because DSLRs are really being phased out in favor of mirrorless. The chart that you see here, the graphic, shows that there's mirrors involved that allow you through the viewfinder to see your image through the lens. Now, mirrorless cameras, it's quite obvious they're here to stay. They're a little simpler in that the light goes onto an image sensor and you're viewing what the image sensor sees without having to use an a mechanical shutter or without having to look through mirrors to see your image. I recently was lucky enough to upgrade to the Nikon Z8 mirrorless camera. It is really a wonderful camera. I was kind of shying away from making the mirrorless plunge, but I have to admit, it really is an amazing camera for bird photography. Some of the advantage that I've noticed in the camera, I've only had it for about a month or so, is that it has a silent shutter, which really is fantastic for bird photography. How many times we are close to a bird, and as soon as we snap some photos, the bird becomes more aware of our presence. Another big advantage is because there's no mirrors involved, there's no blackout in the viewfinder, and so the actual exposure is seen, which helps a lot when there's birds in flight. It's easier to track the birds when you actually don't lose sight of them. You can also, some of the mirrorless cameras now actually can find and focus on the eyes of the bird and other animals. In fact, the Nikon Z8 just came out with an update today for their software in the camera, which is actually primarily for bird photographers. So although I haven't put it on my camera yet, I'll be anxious to see how it helps the autofocus performance. They have better performance in low light, and my particular Z8 camera has a curtain that protects the image sensor from getting dust on it, which is also very helpful. So those are my main advantages that I really like so far. Now, as far as the silent shutter goes, if you get close enough to a belted kingfisher, you'll be happy that your camera's not making any noise. Now, lens quality is very important. It's really of the utmost importance. A camera like this, a lens like this is hugely expensive and very, very, very heavy. They're very great for low light situations, and they have large apertures, which we're going to talk about in a bit, and they produce wonderful photos. But the day of carrying and lugging one of those around is over for a lot of photographers. Photographers like me, I much prefer lighter equipment like this new Nikon, or fairly new anyway, Nikon 500 5.6. It doesn't let in quite as much light, but it weighs about half as much, and it's, even though expensive, it's still quite more reasonable to add to your photographic gear. Now, in terms of the camera, there's two types of cameras out there. There's a camera with a FX crop and a smaller sensor, which is a DX crop, which is a little bit less expensive. It just so happens one of the advantages of my current Nikon Z8 is that it allows you to do either. It'll switch to the DX crop when you want it to, and that allows you to see more of the bird, like you can see in this particular instance. The FX crop will enable you to have better quality overall, but again, you have to be close enough to your subject. Yet, in other words, you have to be close enough for your subject to have the benefits of the higher quality that you find in the FX crop. Now, I know that there's a lot going on here, and it seems very, very complicated, but the truth is that today's modern cameras have built so much more complexity than most photographers ever need. My new camera has way too many features and buttons, in my opinion. I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. The Z8 that I was telling you about, if there's any negative, it's that it goes through batteries quicker. So I have to make sure that I have freshly charged batteries always on hand. I know it looks like there's a lot going on here on the back of this camera, but for good bird photography, we really only need to be concerned about three things. And those three things are shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. Now, the shutter speed is probably the most crucial variable when shooting birds. If the bird is moving, you're going to need a fast shutter speed, and it seems that birds are always moving. This black-capped chickadee was photographed at 1/2000th of a second, which is a shutter speed that I'm now using a lot for my bird photography. Now, on the other end, this is another extreme. I took a drive up to Hammonasset Beach State Park on the Connecticut shoreline and photographed long exposures of waves crashing around the rocks. And this particular photo was a 4-second exposure, and I put a filter over the 35mm lens to enable me to have a longer exposure. And amazingly, when I was walking along the beach, I came across this Dunlin who absolutely stayed perfectly still as I set up my tripod and shot several frames of this bird basically completely content just standing on that rock ignoring me. It was really an amazing experience. Another good reason to take your long exposure photography is that it enables the photographer to slow down and enjoy taking in the environment and the scene around you. Sometimes we move a little bit too fast. I'm a big fan of slow birding. Now, the aperture is also called the f-stop, and it's also called the lens opening. That's the part of the lens that lets light in. All we really need to remember in terms of the f-stop is that the larger the number, the smaller the lens opening. And that's because it's a fraction, actually. That number is actually 1 over 2.8. The larger the f-stop number, the smaller the aperture. And all you have to remember is that in most bird photography, at least my preference is to photograph with the lens wide open. That is f2.8 if you have a lens that wide. My camera lens is f5.6, and that is to let in as much light as possible and shoot at a fast shutter speed. Now, what used to be called grain in film is now called noise in digital photography. You can avoid noise by shooting at the lowest ISO as possible. Another word for ISO is ISO, some people refer to it. You can see on this red-bellied woodpecker that there's grain shown in the enlargement on the lower right-hand corner, or that is noise. The noise, I should go back and say, the noise can be improved upon with software, however, during the processing of the photos. Now, I found out about auto ISO not too long ago, and it's an amazing feature. When a bird flies into shadows and then into the sunlight and then back into the shadows again, it means adjustments are needed to get the proper exposure. But by setting your camera to auto ISO, your camera will automatically adjust the ISO needed based on what shutter speed and aperture settings you've chosen manually. When auto ISO is enabled, the camera can choose a higher ISO when the bird flies into the shade and then automatically drop the ISO when it goes into the sunnier area. It's truly an amazing feature. So here's your settings in a nutshell. Shoot in manual. Shoot at a shutter speed of 1/1000 or 1/2000 of a second to freeze the motion, but understand that you may have to choose a longer shutter speed on cloudy days. You want the lens wide open to let in as much light as possible. In this case, for my lens, it's f5.6. And with the auto ISO feature turned on, you'll be off to a great start getting good exposures of birds in the fields. Now, the autofocus mode is important to have selected as a continuous focus, not single focus. For Canon shooters, this is called servo mode. Single focus is for focusing on stationary subjects, and we seldom have that luxury when it comes to bird. But with continuous or servo focus, the camera will continue to refocus on the bird as it moves. Now, you can also choose focus points within the continuous focus. I personally prefer to try to just keep a single focus point on the bird. There's less of a chance of another branch or a background interfering with your selection. But for birds in flight, it's helpful to have multiple focus points to give you a wider selection of the bird to photograph. An example where this comes in handy is if a bird is taking off from a branch. If there's a wider focus area that you've got the focus mode on with multiple sensor points spread out over a wider area, you're more likely to capture the bird when it takes off. Now, this is kind of a moot point with these new cameras now. They can actually track and follow the bird's eyes, but that is something I haven't really had a chance to really explore. Other birds, like a northern harrier is another example where flying erratically above an open meadow, a wider focus area will help you get a nice photo of that bird. Now, exposure compensation allows you to tell the camera's meter to add or subtract light from an exposure. When this is enabled, the camera takes the meter reading and then adds or subtracts your adjustment. Here's a situation where I used that with a red-shouldered hawk, and it was a snowy day, so it was throwing the light meter off just a bit. So I added plus 2/3 of a stop of exposure to try to get a better exposure on that bird. Long lenses now have a vibration reduction setting that you can use. And it was used on this particular photo because I photographed this shot at 1/60th of a second. And I did that with the vibration reduction setting turned on. And I had the camera resting on a window frame. Now, I was recently in New Rochelle, and I saw a large number of monk parakeets. Now, when I originally raised my camera up, I could see mostly silhouettes, and that's because the meter got thrown off by the background. So I went to the exposure compensation button and added 2 1/3 stops, and that enabled me to see these birds in a much more favorable exposure, and you could see the green much better as well. So remember that exposure compensation button. It can really be very, very helpful. Another thing that's really important is shooting in what's called camera raw. Now, the JPEG file is the most popular format for sharing digital photos. However, I highly recommend you capture your images using the RAW format. You can always convert the image to a JPEG later, or you can actually shoot both RAW and a JPEG at the same time on most cameras. This particular photo of an American red star was accidentally overexposed by quite a bit, but I was able to bring back the highlights and the feathers and bring out the shadow detail only because it was shot in camera raw. You see, in JPEGs, what they do is the camera actually bakes in settings, and it's much more difficult to adjust to make adjustments on your exposure once they're already all set in the JPEG. The raw file needs to be processed, however, using software like Adobe Lightroom, but it's definitely worth the effort as it gives you more flexibility when processing the photos. Now, early morning light and late afternoon light provides the most dramatic photos. As you know, birds are most active in the morning hours, so that works out very well for us birders. The morning light is also the most beautiful for photographing birds. Now, this cedar waxwing was actually photographed when, one morning I ran out of coffee, and we know what kind of an emergency that is, right? So I got in my car and I went to Stop and Shop, and I got there so early they hadn't even opened yet. And as I was sitting in my car parked, I looked over this tree and saw these amazing cedar waxwings, which brings me to a rule that we always should keep in mind. Always keep your camera with you. So I definitely have that to thank, and fresh batteries and a fresh media card. And there you go. That was completely lucky. And I even got my coffee afterward. Here's another example of a car situation where I saw these robins on a snowy day eating berries. And I just stayed in my car on the road, grabbed my camera and shot through the window, and the robins paid me no mind. And it was just great fun to have a chance to photograph this bird in the middle of winter eating those berries. Now, this photo was taken from a portable blind, more or less a small tent with a hole in it. I set up near a bird feeder in the middle of winter, and I was able to get away with a shorter lens and a very wide f2.8 lens aperture. That's because I needed to let in as much light as possible on this particular snowy day. This photo got a lot of good play in the Audubon website, and it was one of those selected as the top 100, which was a lot of fun. When you're editing your photos on your computer, it's nice to maybe move the bird a little bit off center. It just has to do with composition, which works well with this photo. And also, when you're photographing birds, the background makes a big difference. If you can find a background that's free of distractions, it really helps. You can also try to get to eye level if at all possible. This bobolink flew in and landed on these plants, which was lucky for me. Also, if you need to, you can just slowly lower your body down to in this case, sand, to get a lower look at shorebirds. It really does make a difference if you can get at their eye level. We've all learned how difficult it is to approach a bird as their senses are so keen. Sometimes it works just to try to head into a birdie area and then just to stay in one spot and let the birds come to you. That has to do with that mindfulness approach that we talked about a little bit earlier with Maria and Donna. It really is a lot of fun just to see what kind of birds just show up with you just sitting there. In this case, this yellow-rumped warbler in Terrytown just came into a branch very, very close to me, almost more curious about me. It was really fun. It's really also fun and comforting to know that in less than 3 months or so, we'll be seeing these beautiful warblers again here in the Northeast. Now, slow, gentle movements are less likely to frighten birds, and it's interesting to add that I'm told that looking directly at a bird will scare it off, as two forward-facing eyes are the eyes of a predator. But holding a camera to your face actually hides your eyes, which may help you when you get close to a bird like a blue-headed vireo. Now, last fall, I had a really amazing experience in that I waded into the Long Island Sound about chest deep with my fishing waders on, and a osprey flew in and landed on the shore, not maybe, I don't know, 20 yards from me, and walked into the water straight toward me, and then got into the water and took a bath. I took many, many photos, but this was my favorite one. I was completely amazed by this bird's willingness to tolerate my being so close. Finally, one of the most important things we do with our photography is to share our photos with others and hopefully instill a desire to protect birds and their habitats. Author Treb Johnson said, "When we are open to beauty, it is more likely to appear to us. When we share that gift by pointing it out to others, we find we have even more of it to celebrate." Thank you all so much for joining me this evening. I hope you've enjoyed it. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom. I could honestly like look through all those photos again. I mean, you really capture the soul of the birds. Like you just feel like this kind of like you're in like this communal space with them, and it's really lovely to see. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah, thank you. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to, pop them into the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask Tom, please go ahead.
Aaron, it's Ted Kavanaugh here. I've got a couple of questions. Thanks very much, Tom. Those are great photos. A couple of questions. I've got a Z8 as well, and I have to say I'm not completely sold on it. And in some respects, and I don't know if this was your experience, but I sort of found the sort of electronic version versus looking through a mirror, which is really, in some ways, kind of, first of all, it's always open. If you've got your camera on, as soon as you look through the uh, through the camera, you're gonna, it's gonna be on. I find that when I bring my camera up to my eye, sometimes if I haven't turned it on, you've got that little bit of a pause before it kicks in. But these are minor things. A question for you on presets. And I'm wondering, on your Z8, if you have those presets sort of set up for particular situations where either you've got a bird in flight or you've got another situation where you know that the particular settings you want are going to be perfect for that situation. And again, just wondering if you've used those.
These are good questions, Ted. And just for everyone that hasn't quite on the mirrorless route yet, what Ted was referring to is that when you're looking through the viewfinder, you're actually looking at a little video screen. And the quality is actually quite good. It hasn't bothered me nearly as much as I thought it would. And that little delay, Ted, I've gotten around that by when I'm raising the camera up to my face to look through the viewfinder, I prime the shutter. I pump it a couple times to turn it on so that by the time it gets up to my face to hold the camera, and by the way, this is the D8 with a 105, oh sorry, 85 millimeter lens on it. That way, by the time I get it up to my face, Ted, I don't have that issue of waiting for it to more or less turn on. As far as the presets go, I'm not there yet. I tried to make this camera as simple as I possibly can. I basically so enjoy the silent mode. So when I photograph basketball. I just got back from my son's basketball game. He plays for Dobbs Ferry High School. I like to hear the shutter click, so I turn on a fake sound. It actually makes a sound that when you click the shutter, you hear the camera, and it just letting you know that you're taking photos. So that's the only adjustment I make basically, is that turning the sound on and off. I do sometimes go between DX and FX depending on how close I am to the birds. But as far as diving into all of the incredible options that are on this camera, I'm really not there yet. So sorry about that.
No, that's fine. I've got one
Okay.
more question and then I'll shut up. And it's sort of the philosophy that you were talking about, which I'm interested in, which, you've set the shutter speed and the aperture and you're on manual. And my approach always has been to go with auto. And just from the standpoint that sometimes you've got just a split second to shoot a bird, and the last thing I want to have to do is sort of muck around, changing a shutter speed or an aperture. By the time I got it done, the bird is gone. And so I'm sort of trusting the camera on auto to give me in as short a period of time the best possible outcome. And that sounds really dumb when you've got this really high-powered camera that you can really fine-tune to perfection to use an auto mode. But I'm just wondering if you've ever been tempted to do that just for the sake of speed.
Well, actually, you know what, Ted? I am using an auto mode, and that is auto ISO. Even though it's set for manual, I'm setting the manual shutter speed, setting the manual lens opening, f-stop, but it's automatically adjusting the ISO, or the sensitivity of the light, as I'm taking my photos. So it's by all means, I'm using automatic that's built in with the camera, and it works like a charm. Now, before I even knew about auto ISO, I would use auto shutter speed, because shutter being the most important aspect, the most important. So yes, I've dealt with what you're talking about, those split decisions, changing it on the fly. It can be frustrating, but auto ISO has totally changed it for me.
I'm gonna try that. So thanks
Yeah,
very much, and
sure.
I'll shut up.
No, no.
Hi, Tom. It's Dick Leonard. Thanks
Oh,
so much for your very interesting talk. Excuse me? I
Dick,
can't hear.
thank you. Thank you. I saw on eBird that you had the canvas back today. Good for you.
Yes, actually, and I have to put up a photo from a very long way across the lake. But I just got the Z8 a few days ago,
Oh,
and I'm wrestling with
mm,
all the settings, and it's great to hear you talk about the complexity and how you're trying to simplify things and not do the presets at this point. That's what, by necessity, that's what I've been doing, and maybe try work my way into a few presets, but of course the auto ISO is great. But this was very helpful talk. I've jotted down a number of points, and I really appreciate it.
oh, great. Well, thank you. And I wanted to mention that, they say as we get older that it's helpful to take up a hobby, like maybe learning to play an instrument, to keep the brain active. Well, I'm thinking that learning some of this new technology built into these cameras works pretty well too. I'm hoping anyway. So that's the way I'm looking at it. Man, oh man, these cameras have so much going for them now. But it's a matter of
Yes,
trying to figure out what you need and what you don't, right?
yes, absolutely.
Thank you. And
Hel- oh, sorry. I was just wondering if you could talk about metering versus autofocus.
Sure. There's several different types of metering. Spot metering is when you can put a dot right on your subject and it tries to come up with a proper exposure that way. That's ideal, I guess, if you really want to get down to it. But I use a metering that I've always used on all of my photos, and a lot of photographers believe in it, called matrix metering. And again, you're
Uh,
using the camera's computer to take a look at what's happening in the scene with the highlights and the shadows, and it comes out and produces a pretty darn accurate exposure, based on what you're hoping for. But the truth is, there are adjustments that sometimes have to be made, even with matrix metering, as sophisticated as it is. And that's where I was talking about that exposure compensation button. So, I'm constantly glancing at the back of my back of my camera, that is, to try to get a grip on how I'm doing with my exposures and whether I need to adjust the exposure compensation. But matrix metering is really a very, very popular metering that selection amongst nature photographers and bird photographers. And I don't know, I hope
Oh,
I answered your question. I don't know if that's what you were.
well,
Yeah,
yeah, because they have spot metering and then
right.
there's three, like
Yeah, yeah,
multiple different ones. And
yeah.
how does that relate to the autofocus? So metering is not really about focus?
The metering is strictly about the light that enters the camera and hits your sensor. So getting a
Oh,
properly metered photograph will prevent you from getting a heavily overexposed or heavily underexposed. Ideally, you want to have your highlights that are visible, and your shadows are more or less visible, and that's where metering comes in. Now, autofocus is an entirely different ball game. Yeah, that's entirely has to do with getting your image sharp, getting the bird sharp. Yeah.
oh, okay, great. Oh, thank you so much. That
Oh, you're
that
welcome.
was a confusing thing for me.
Oh, okay.
Great. I just wanted to share some of the questions that were in the chat.
Okay.
Donna had asked, well, Richard said, thanks for a great presentation. Donna said, do you have an opinion about micro 4:3 mirrorless cameras?
Um, okay. My understanding is it's even a smaller sensor, smaller sensor size. The cameras are smaller, they're lighter, they're very portable. But the only thing that suffers a little bit compared to some of these other, more expensive cameras, I guess, for lack of a better way to describe them, is the overall image quality. Now that's being said from someone who's never even seen one, let alone touched one. So I hesitate to offer too much of an opinion, but there's no question about it. These DX and FX sensors, the larger sensors, do make a difference with nature photography for sure.
Thank you for sharing that. And Artist asked, how do you protect your camera when walking in wet or rainy weather?
Hmm. I About a week after I got my Z8, I went out very, very early in the morning. The sun hadn't even come up with, and it was one of those snowy, rainy mornings. We don't get many of those, do we? But it was. And I walked under a evergreen tree, and just as I walked under, the branch let go of a nice big clump of snow falling directly on the back of my camera. However, I can be confident, and thankfully we can be confident with the gear nowadays, that it's made to be able to handle this type of weather. All I do is stick it under my jacket if it's raining, and I just try to expose it as or stick it under a shirt even, or even bring a towel out in the field and drape it over the camera. Anything to keep as much water and rain from it as possible. But the truth is that bad weather can lend you to some really good photos. So it's good to get outdoors with your camera, rain or shine, really.
Absolutely. And I could see that from the photos you've taken. Um, Actually, I just want to say one of my favorite photos that you took was of I'm forgetting which bird was in the photo, but there was like the raindrop.
That's
They were like,
that's the semi-palmated sand.
yes,
And
yes,
that's it. That's one of those puddle birds over at Pelham Park. There's a lot of peas there, aren't there? Yeah.
yes.
But those puddles, they really can attract a wide variety of shorebirds. So that's a
Yes.
fun place to go on a rainy day for sure.
Yeah, I absolutely love that shot.
Thank you.
Um, and Leslie asked, can you recommend any local photography classes or instructors who can help you get to know the advanced settings on your camera better?
Oh, that's a really good question. I have to tell you, I am so impressed with some of the photographers, very good nature photographers and bird photographers that do these tutorials on YouTube, wow, you can learn a lot in like 10 or 15 minutes by listening to them. And they're exceptionally good photographers, and they really know their equipment really well. And you could pause and, play it back over again. I honestly don't know too many other courses, so to speak, in the area. But if you'd like to contact me, I'd love to, go out and do some birding with other folks, and I'm happy to help people in any way that I can. So, when you look at the type of photography, the bird photography, especially on sites like Instagram or even on YouTube, it makes you realize how many incredibly good photographers there are out there. So it's worth exploring.
Absolutely. And David asked, what mechanism do you use to adjust exposure compensation on the fly? The button and the wheel, or another?
That's a good question, and that's exactly what it is. You push the button and you turn the wheel either clockwise or counterclockwise. Actually, it's neither way, to the right or to the left. And I have to admit, I very seldom use it in the minus. That does not come into play nearly as much as adding to the exposure, because I'm trying to get away from silhouettes. In other words, so many of these birds are backlit, especially looking up into a tree, and that tends to throw the meter off, even with the matrix metering set up. So that's how that works. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Tom. And, Catherine said, thank you, Tom. Stunning photos and very helpful tips. And Leslie said, thank you for answering her question. And she says, and thanks for this very informative, beautiful, and inspiring presentation. Ready to go out and take more photos, rain or shine. And an artist said, lovely presentation with lots of practical information. So thank you so much. I don't know if anyone else has any questions, if they want to unmute themselves. This was an excellent presentation, Tom. Thank you so much.
I so appreciate it. It was really nice meeting you and everyone else. Thank you.
Lovely meeting you as well. And thank you all for joining tonight. And we look forward to seeing you again at one of our next programs. Our next program is actually in April. If you go to our website, please register. The program is going to be about birds and Shakespeare. So thank you so much again, Tom.
My pleasure. Have a great night.
You as well. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.